Judge sentences innocent black twins to death. In a courtroom dripping with bias, no evidence, no mercy. Just two teenage girls shackled and silenced. Then one of them shouts, "Call our father. He's the U.S. Attorney General." The room explodes. The cover-up begins. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courthouse parking lot as Jamison Green sat in his black SUV, his fingers drumming against the leather steering wheel. The weight of what he was about to do pressed down on his shoulders like a heavy coat. Next to him, Elliot Barnes watched silently, his usual easy demeanor replaced by something more solemn, his eyes betraying the gravity of the moment. Jamison pulled out his secure phone, his movements precise and controlled. The device felt cold in his hand as he punched in the familiar number. 1 ring, 2 rings. His jaw tightened with each passing second, a muscle flickering beneath his skin. "Office of Professional Responsibility," a crisp voice answered. "This is Attorney General Green." His voice was steel-wrapped in silk, the voice he used when mountains needed moving. "Authorization code 739 Alpha Delta." Elliot shifted in his seat, his eyes fixed on the courthouse entrance where people streamed in and out, unaware of the storm about to break. Men and women in business attire hurried up and down the steps, their lives continuing as normal while everything was about to change. "Code confirmed, sir. How may we assist?" The voice on the phone had shifted subtly, recognizing the authority behind the call. "Initiate federal oversight, full review of the Green case." Jamison paused, then added, "Quietly." His knuckles whitened around the phone. The silence on the other end lasted only a moment. "Understood, sir. Immediate implementation?" "Yes. I want eyes on every document, every decision, every motion filed. If someone so much as sneezed during this trial, I want to know about it." Jamison's words were measured but carried the full weight of his office and his newfound personal stake. "Yes, sir, we'll begin immediately." Jamison ended the call and caught Elliot's questioning look. "Now we wait," he said, his voice tight with controlled emotion, a father's determination simmering beneath his professional exterior. Across town, in the wood-paneled back room of the sheriff's office, Judge Whitman Sloan paced the floor like a caged lion. The expensive leather soles of his shoes clicked against the hardwood with each step, a ticking clock counting down their advantage. Sheriff Walt Hendricks leaned against the wall, his weathered face creased with worry, while District Attorney Rachel Voss perched on the edge of a chair, her normally perfectly composed demeanor showing cracks, her manicured nails tapping nervously on her knee. "He's not going to let this go," Voss said, breaking the tense silence. Her fingers worried at the pearl necklace at her throat, twisting the strand back and forth. Sloan stopped pacing and turned to face them. The afternoon light filtering through the Venetian blinds striped his face like prison bars, an irony lost on no one in the room. "Of course he won't. He's the Attorney General of the United States, and we've given him the most powerful motivation possible, his own flesh and blood." Hendricks pushed himself off the wall, his badge catching the light. "He's coming for us," he growled, his voice rough with fear disguised as anger, his hand instinctively moving to his holster. "Then we stay one step ahead," Sloan replied, his tone measured and cold as winter ice. He moved to Hendricks's desk and placed both hands flat on its surface, leaning forward. "Rachel, I need every digital record of this case suppressed, immediately." "But that's—" Voss started, her legal training momentarily overriding her self-preservation. "Necessary," Sloan cut her off, his eyes boring into hers. "File them under backlog. Make them disappear into the system. Paper trails can be managed, but digital footprints are forever." Hendricks crossed his arms, the leather of his uniform creaking. "What about the courthouse security footage?" "Technical malfunction," Sloan said smoothly, the lie rolling off his tongue with practiced ease. "These old systems, they're so unreliable. Walt, I trust you can handle that." The sheriff nodded slowly, his face a mask of grim determination, years of following Sloan's lead making the decision automatic. "And the jury selection records?" Voss asked, her legal training warring with her survival instinct. beads of sweat forming at her hairline. Lost in transit, a clerical error. Sloan straightened up, adjusting his tie with practiced precision, smoothing away any sign of distress. We've maintained order in this county for decades. I won't let one man, no matter his title, destroy what we've built. Back in the SUV, Jameson's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression unchanging as he read the message. "It's done," he said to Elliot. "The Oversight Committee is mobilizing. They'll have preliminary findings within 48 hours. His voice held no triumph, only grim purpose. Elliot nodded, understanding the gravity of what had just been set in motion. They won't take this lying down. He glanced at the courthouse, as if already seeing the battle lines being drawn. No, Jameson agreed, his eyes fixed on the courthouse. They won't. He turned to his friend, his face set with determination. Let's find out where the cracks begin. His fingers gripped the steering wheel, as if physically holding on to his resolve. Inside the sheriff's office, Voss was already on her phone, typing rapidly. I'm initiating the protocol now. Everything will be buried in administrative requests and system updates by morning. Her fingers flew over the screen, erasing their tracks with each tap. Sloan watched her work with approval. Good. Walt, get your team started on the security footage. I want it done tonight. His voice carried the authority of decades of unchallenged power. What about Green's federal dogs? Hendricks asked, his hand unconsciously touching his gun, the weight of it a comfort against the coming storm. They'll find exactly what we want them to find, Sloan replied, his confidence unwavering. A perfectly ordinary case, handled by the book, nothing more. His smile never reached his cold eyes. The room fell silent as each of them contemplated what lay ahead. They'd worked together for years, maintaining their version of justice, their order. Now it was all threatening to unravel because of one man and his newfound daughters, a father's love proving more dangerous than they'd anticipated. In the parking lot, Jameson started the SUV's engine. The powerful machine hummed to life, much like the federal machinery he'd just set in motion. His phone buzzed again, another confirmation. The Oversight Committee was already assembling their team, pieces moving on a chessboard only he could see. He looked at Elliot, his expression hardening with resolve. The time for playing by their rules was over. Now it was about justice, real justice, and he would tear down every wall, expose every shadow, and break every false foundation until he found it. For his daughters, he would remake the world if necessary. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in Celeste's 6x8 concrete cell, casting harsh shadows that made everything feel even more lifeless. Her footsteps echoed as she paced, 7 steps forward, spin, 7 steps back. The rhythm was maddening, but it was better than sitting still with her thoughts. The walls seemed to close in a little more each day, squeezing the air from her lungs. Her bruised knuckles throbbed raw and purple where she'd struck the wall earlier. Celeste glanced at them, barely registering the pain. Physical hurt was nothing compared to the ache in her chest, the hollow space where Maya should be. She flexed her fingers, watching the skin stretch over bone, wondering if anything would ever feel whole again. She stopped pacing, pressing her forehead against the cool cinder block. Her breathing came in sharp bursts, too fast, too shallow. Keep it together, she whispered to herself, but the words sounded hollow in the empty cell. Her hot breath bounced back against her face, a reminder that she was utterly alone. Across the prison in the medical wing, Maya sat cross-legged on her thin mattress. The springs creaked as she shifted, trying to find a position that didn't make her ribs ache. Her fingers trembled slightly as she tore another strip of toilet paper, careful to keep it as smooth as possible. She ran her thumb along the edge, ironing out the wrinkles with patient determination. The pencil she'd been allowed was barely longer than her thumb now, worn down from constant use. Maya pressed it gently to the paper, adding another note to her makeshift staff. Music had always been their language, hers and Celeste's. Even now, separated by concrete and steel, she could hear her sister's voice in her head, harmonizing with the melody she was creating. The notes danced before her eyes, offering escape when her body couldn't. A harsh cough ripped through her chest, making her double over. Maya pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to muffle the sound. When she pulled it away, spots of red stained her gray sleeve. She quickly wiped it on the underside of her mattress where the guards wouldn't see. The metallic taste of blood lingered on her tongue, a bitter reminder of time running out. The memory hit Celeste like a physical blow, Maya's face pale and scared as the guards pulled them apart. "No, she needs me," Celeste had screamed, fighting against the hands that held her back. But Maya had gone quiet, the way she always did when she was truly afraid, her eyes wide and full of things unsaid. That silent surrender haunted Celeste more than any scream could have. Rage surged through Celeste's body. She spun and slammed her fist into the wall again, welcoming the burst of pain that shot up her arm. It was something real, something she could feel besides this helplessness that threatened to drown her. The concrete scraped away another layer of skin, leaving tiny flecks of blood on the gray surface. "Keep her safe," she'd promised their mother. "Always protect your sister." The words echoed in her head now, mocking her. What good were promises when steel bars and concrete walls stood between them? She'd failed the one person who mattered most. Maya's pencil scratched across another scrap of paper, marking down the notes that flowed through her mind. It was the only thing keeping her sane, this ability to create something beautiful in a place designed to strip away everything human. Each note was an act of defiance, a tiny rebellion against the system that held them. Heavy footsteps approached and Maya quickly slipped the papers into her Bible, tucking it under her pillow just as a guard passed by her cell. She forced herself to look calm, even as another cough built in her chest. The guard didn't even glance her way, his boots clicking against the floor as he continued his rounds. She counted each step, waiting for the sound to fade. When he was gone, Maya let the cough come, pressing her face into her pillow to muffle the sound. Each spasm sent daggers through her chest, but she couldn't let them see. They'd already taken Celeste from her. She couldn't risk being moved to the infirmary, further away from any chance of seeing her sister. Her body shook with the effort of staying quiet. In her cell, Celeste finally stopped pacing. Her knuckles were bleeding now, tiny crimson drops falling to the gray floor. She watched them fall, remembering how Maya used to clean and bandage her scrapes when they were kids, gentle hands and soft words of comfort. Maya had always been the healer between them, the one who put broken things back together. Maya leaned back against the wall, her breath wheezing slightly in her chest. She pulled out her Bible again, carefully removing the musical notes she'd hidden there. The melody was coming together, piece by piece. It was their story, hers and Celeste's, written in the only language that had never failed them. Her fingers traced the notes like they were precious jewels. The fluorescent lights flickered, making Maya's eyes hurt as she studied her work. She could feel her strength ebbing, but she had to finish this. Had to get it perfect. Her fingers traced over the notes, hearing them in her mind as clearly as if Celeste were there singing them. The music was their connection, unbreakable even now. Celeste pressed her palm flat against the wall, imagining she could feel Maya's presence on the other side. Somewhere in this maze of concrete and steel, her sister was alone, and there wasn't a damn thing she could do about it. She closed her eyes, trying to send her thoughts through the barriers between them. Maya's eyes drifted to the ceiling, gray and featureless above her. Her voice was barely a whisper in the silent cell. "Don't forget the melody." The words were a prayer, floating up into the stale prison air. She looked down at the scrap of paper in her hands, at the title written in her careful script, Second Chances. The music was all there, waiting to be heard, waiting for Celeste's voice to bring it to life. In this small way, they remained undefeated, their spirits still free to soar above walls and fences. The motel room's dim lamp cast a yellow glow over the scattered papers covering every inch of the cheap wooden table. Jameson had loosened his tie hours ago, and his usually pristine suit jacket hung over the back of a chair. His fingers moved methodically through court documents, while his eyes scanned each line with the precision of someone who'd spent decades dissecting legal text. The familiar weight of responsibility pressed on his shoulders, but tonight it felt different, more personal than any case he'd ever handled. Elliot sat across from him, the blue light from his laptop reflecting off his glasses as he cross-referenced digital records. Empty coffee cups and takeout containers littered the edges of their makeshift command center. The wall-mounted air conditioner hummed in the background, fighting against the stuffy summer night, its rhythmic drone a constant reminder of the hours ticking by. "Look at this," Jameson said, his voice tight with controlled intensity. He pushed a police memo across the table, careful not to disturb the organized chaos of their research. Dale Stinton. His name shows up in the initial response logs, the booking report, even the evidence inventory. He reached for another stack of papers, this time official court documents. But there's not a single mention of him in any trial exhibits. Not one. His heart quickened at the discovery, sensing they'd stumbled onto something significant. Elliot's fingers flew across his keyboard. "Give me a minute." He navigated through database after database, his expression growing more focused. "Got something. Dale Stinton, former officer with the department, left the force about 8 months before the trial." His voice carried the excitement of breakthrough. Jameson leaned forward, his elbows resting on a stack of witness statements. Why did he leave? The question hung in the stale motel room air. More typing. Official record says he resigned, but Elliot's eyebrows rose as he dug deeper. There was an internal affairs investigation. Misconduct. Details are sealed, but he was basically pushed out quietly. No charges filed. He glanced up at Jameson, the significance clear in his eyes. "The timing," Jameson muttered, pulling out his phone and checking dates. He was the first responding officer the night the girls were arrested. Right here, his badge number on the initial call log. He stood up, pacing the worn carpet between the beds. They kept him completely out of the courtroom proceedings. Why? His attorney's instinct buzzed like a warning bell. Elliot swiveled his laptop around. Look at his service record before the misconduct charge. 15 years on the force, multiple commendations. Whatever happened, it was serious enough to end a solid career. He tapped the screen for emphasis. "Or convenient enough," Jameson said, stopping to study a timeline they'd pinned to the wall. They needed him gone before the trial. A cop with that much experience doesn't just disappear from a major case unless someone wants him silent. His mind raced with possibilities, each more troubling than the last. The air conditioner clicked off, leaving the room in sudden silence. Elliot started creating a new digital folder, labeling it Stinton. His personnel file is locked down tight, but I can access his basic information. Last known address is still local, about 20 minutes outside town. He typed with renewed purpose. Jameson returned to the table, spreading out the police memos where Stinton's name appeared. He was there that night. He saw everything. And someone made damn sure he never testified about what really happened. The thought of his daughter's fate being sealed by such deliberate manipulation made his stomach tighten. Papers rustled as Jameson methodically arranged the documents, creating a visual timeline of Stinton's involvement and subsequent disappearance from the case. His jaw tightened as patterns emerged. Dates that didn't quite align, reports with suspicious gaps, signatures missing where they should have been present. Every inconsistency felt like a personal affront. Elliot worked steadily, building a comprehensive digital profile, property records, vehicle registrations, professional licenses, anything that might help locate the former officer. The soft click of his keyboard provided a steady rhythm as the night grew later, the darkness outside the thin curtains complete. His dismissal coincides exactly with the preliminary hearing dates, Elliot noted, adding another file to his growing collection. They must have known he'd be called to testify. His voice carried the weight of their discovery. Jameson picked up another transcript, this one from a pretrial motion. The defense requested all responding officers appear. The prosecution claimed staffing changes made some witnesses unavailable. His voice carried the weight of 2 decades in courtrooms, recognizing legal maneuvering for what it was. They buried him in paperwork and red tape until it was too late. He shook his head, disgusted by the tactics. The wall clock ticked past midnight as they continued their methodical investigation. Every document told part of a story of careful orchestration, of evidence managed and witnesses controlled. Stinton's name stood out now like a beacon, his absence from the trial proceedings no longer just an oversight, but a calculated move. The Attorney General and Jameson recognized the patterns of corruption with painful clarity. Jameson gathered the most relevant documents into a separate file, marking key passages with yellow sticky notes. Each piece added to their understanding. How Stinton had been present for crucial moments. How his reports contained details absent from later official records. How thoroughly he'd been erased from the trial narrative. His hands moved with the precision of a surgeon, isolating the vital evidence. "I've got his current information compiled," Elliot said, saving his work to an encrypted drive. "Employment history, known associates, everything we could need to track him down." He closed his laptop with a satisfied snap. Jameson stood at the evidence wall they'd created, studying the web of connections they'd mapped out. Stinton's name now sat at a crucial junction, a missing piece they hadn't known to look for until tonight. He reached for the file, closing it with deliberate care, his fingers lingering on the folder as if it contained the key to his daughter's freedom. "If this man's still in town, we find him tomorrow," Jameson said, his voice carrying the quiet certainty of someone who'd just found the crack in a seemingly impenetrable wall. The attorney in him had spotted the weakness in the case. The father in him would exploit it without mercy. The night stretched ahead, but sleep wouldn't come for Jameson. Too many pieces were finally falling into place. Too many questions suddenly had potential answers. The truth about his daughter's case, and the people who had buried it, was finally starting to surface. For the first time since learning about his children, hope flickered in his chest. Fragile, but undeniable. The morning sun beat down on the cracked asphalt of the gas station parking lot as Jameson and Elliot's car pulled in, tires crunching over scattered gravel. The place looked abandoned at first glance. Weeds pushing through concrete, faded signs, and rust-spotted gas pumps that had seen better days. A single pickup truck sat parked near the entrance, its paint peeling in the harsh summer weather. The air smelled of dust and old gasoline, a forgotten corner of America where secrets could hide in plain sight. Jameson adjusted his tie, more out of habit than necessity. He'd traded his usual power suit for something less conspicuous, a light blue button-down and khakis. No point advertising who he was before he had to. Through the grimy windows of the convenience store, he could see their target. Dale Stinton, looking exactly like his personnel photo, just older and more worn down. The man's shoulders slumped as he leaned against the counter, a shadow of the officer he once was. "Remember," Jameson said quietly to Elliot, "stay by the door. Watch, but don't engage unless necessary. We need his words, not a confrontation." Elliot nodded, checking that the tiny microphone hidden in Jameson's shirt pocket was working. "Signal's good. You're recording." His fingers tapped the receiver in his pocket once for confirmation. The bell above the door chimed weakly as they entered. The interior matched the outside. Fluorescent lights flickered, shelves held sparse merchandise, and the linoleum floor was scuffed beyond repair. Dale Stinton stood behind the counter, mechanically chewing sunflower seeds and flipping through a car magazine. He barely glanced up at their entrance, his expression bored and distant. Jameson approached the counter with measured steps, taking in every detail. Stinton's hands showed the slight tremor of someone who'd had too much coffee and too little sleep. His employee badge was crooked, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. This wasn't a man who'd landed on his feet after leaving the force. His uniform shirt was stained at the collar, and a faded name tag read Dale in crooked letters. "Pack of Marlboros," Jameson said, keeping his voice casual. When Stinton turned to reach for the cigarettes, Jameson added, "And maybe some answers about Maya and Celeste Green." The change was instant. Stinton's shoulders tensed and he froze with his hand still on the cigarette display. When he turned back, his expression had hardened into something defensive and wary. The sunflower seed in his mouth stilled. "Don't know who you're talking about," he muttered, tossing the cigarette pack onto the counter with more force than necessary. His eyes darted toward the door, calculating. Jameson pulled out his credentials, letting them fall open. "I think you do, Mr. Stinton. I'm Jameson Green, United States Attorney General, and I know you were first on scene the night my daughters were arrested." The word daughters caught slightly in his throat, still unfamiliar on his tongue. Stinton's eyes darted to the door where Elliot stood, then back to Jameson. He spat a sunflower shell into a paper cup. That was a long time ago. Memory's not what it used to be. His fingers drummed nervously on the counter, betraying the casualness in his voice. Interesting, Jameson said, his voice taking on the precise tone he'd used in countless depositions. Because the police logs show you were there for 3 hours, wrote up the initial report yourself. But somehow when the trial came around, you were nowhere to be found. Look, Stinton said, his voice dropping lower. That case is closed. Judge signed off on it and everything. What's done is done. He wiped his palms on his shirt, leaving damp marks on the faded fabric. Jameson leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on the counter. His voice remained calm, but his eyes were razor sharp. I know you were there that night, and I know you didn't testify. The question is why? A bead of sweat rolled down Stinton's temple despite the struggling air conditioning. He wiped it away with a shaky hand, leaving a smear of dirt from the sunflower seeds. The overhead light flickered, casting momentary shadows across his face. You got no idea what you're digging into, Stinton said, trying to sound threatening but coming across as nervous instead. Some things are better left buried. His eyes kept shifting to the security camera in the corner, which Jameson had already noted was unplugged. Nothing stays buried forever, Mr. Stinton, especially not the truth. Jameson's words were quiet, but carried the weight of absolute certainty. Those girls are dying in prison while the real story sits in your conscience. How well are you sleeping these days? Stinton's facade cracked, his face flushed red, and he leaned forward, jabbing a finger at Jameson's chest. They had it coming. I just made sure it stuck. The words burst out like they'd been waiting years to escape, bitter and revealing. The moment hung in the air between them. Stinton's eyes widened as he realized what he'd said, and he stumbled back a step. I mean, that's not what I... His hand knocked over the cup of shells, scattering them across the counter. Thank you, Mr. Stinton, Jameson said smoothly, picking up the untouched pack of cigarettes. You've been very helpful. He placed a business card on the counter. When you're ready to tell the whole story, call me. Before someone else does. The card sat between them, white against the dirty countertop, an invitation and a warning. The bell chimed again as Jameson and Elliot left the store. The morning heat hit them like a wall as they walked across the parking lot. Elliot kept his voice low, though they were well out of earshot. That's enough to crack the dam. Jameson nodded. We keep pressing. His jaw tightened as he slid into the car. They all break eventually. The harsh fluorescent light of the motel room cast a sickly glow across Elliot's face as he hunched over his laptop. Empty coffee cups and scattered legal documents covered every surface, evidence of their days-long investigation. The digital clock on the nightstand blinked 10:47 p.m. when the email notification popped up with a soft ping that seemed to echo in the tense silence. Jameson, Elliot called out, his voice tight with urgency. You need to see this. Now. Jameson emerged from the bathroom, his tie loosened and sleeves rolled up after the long day of interviews and document reviews. Dark circles under his eyes betrayed his exhaustion, but his movements were sharp and purposeful as he crossed the worn carpet. What is it? Encrypted email. No sender information I can trace. Elliot's fingers flew across the keyboard, the clicking sounds rapid and nervous. But there's an audio file attached. It's labeled, Listen Before Midnight. Seems like someone wants us to act quickly. Jameson leaned over Elliot's shoulder, studying the screen with intense focus. His jaw tightened visibly, a muscle twitching at the corner. Security scan? Already done. Files clean. No malware detected. Elliot glanced up, the blue light from the screen reflecting in his tired eyes. Should I play it? Jameson nodded, pulling up a chair that creaked under his weight. The room fell silent, except for the quiet hum of the ancient air conditioner that struggled to cool the stuffy space. The first few seconds were just background noise, shuffling papers, a chair scraping across floor, the muffled sound of a door closing. Then a voice cut through, cultured and precise with that unmistakable hint of Southern aristocracy. Judge Whitman Sloan's voice, Jameson's hands clenched into fists, knuckles turning white. "These girls." Sloan's voice dripped with contempt, each word carefully articulated. "They need to be made an example. People are watching. We don't need their kind flooding this town with sympathy. The community expects certain standards to be upheld." Elliot's sharp intake of breath echoed in the quiet room. His eyes widened in disbelief. Jameson remained perfectly still, but his eyes had turned to steel, cold and unforgiving in the harsh light. The recording continued, each word more damning than the last. Sloan's carefully maintained public persona of judicial impartiality crumbled with every syllable. His true nature emerged, calculating, prejudiced, determined to use his position to maintain what he called order, but was clearly just control. "Start a backup," Jameson ordered quietly, his attorney general's training kicking in. "Multiple locations. Encrypted. This can't disappear." Elliot was already moving, fingers dancing across the keys with practiced efficiency. "Cloud storage, secure server, offline drive. No one's destroying this evidence. I'm timestamping everything." Jameson stood and began to pace, his mind racing through legal precedents and procedural options. This isn't just mishandling a case. This is systematic corruption from the bench itself. He stopped at the window, pulling back the thin curtain and staring out into the darkness of the parking lot. He manipulated everything: jury selection, evidence admission, sentencing guidelines. He's been playing God. The timing of this leak, Elliot mused, still working on securing the file, his face illuminated by the screen's glow. Someone inside must have realized we're investigating, decided to help. Maybe they've been waiting for someone like you to come along. "Someone with access to private conversations," Jameson agreed, tapping his fingers thoughtfully against the windowsill. "Someone who's been watching, waiting for the right moment. Someone with a conscience." He turned back to face Elliot. "Can you trace anything about the sender?" Elliot shook his head, frustration evident in his expression. "Professional job. Whoever sent this knows how to cover their tracks. Multiple proxies, bounced through at least 3 countries." He finished his backup sequence and sat back with a sigh. "But they chose us specifically. They knew we'd understand what to do with it. This wasn't random." The air conditioner rattled to life again with a metallic wheeze, filling the silence as both men absorbed the implications. Jameson walked over to the evidence wall they'd created. Photos, timelines, connections mapped out in red string pinned to a corkboard. At the center were 2 school photos, Maya and Celeste, his daughters. Their young faces smiled out at him, unaware of how their lives had become the center of this legal storm. Everything led back to them. "Play it again," he said softly, his voice barely audible. This time they listened with technical precision, noting timestamps, background noises, context clues. Elliot took notes in rapid shorthand while Jameson closed his eyes, committing every nuance to memory, his legal mind dissecting each damning statement. "There's something else," Elliot said when the recording finished, leaning forward excitedly. "Listen to this part." He scrolled back to a specific timestamp and increased the volume slightly, adjusting his headphones. Behind Sloan's voice, barely audible, was the sound of papers being moved, a door opening and closing, the subtle indicators of a regular office day continuing around this private conversation. A woman's voice murmured something unintelligible in the background. This was recorded in his chambers, Jameson realized, eyes widening slightly. During business hours, not at his home or in a private meeting. Whoever our whistleblower is, they're close to him. Very close, part of his daily routine. Elliot nodded, rubbing his tired eyes. And they took an enormous risk getting this to us. If Sloan finds out who leaked this... Jameson returned to the window, his reflection ghostly in the dark glass. The weight of what they'd just received settled over him like a physical burden. This wasn't just evidence. It was a weapon. One that could tear down not just a corrupt judge, but an entire system of injustice that had nearly cost him his daughters. "We have what we need," he said, voice firm with conviction. "This changes everything." The digital clock clicked over to 11:30 p.m., its red numbers glowing in the dimness. Outside, a car passed on the highway, its headlights briefly illuminating the room before darkness returned. In that moment of clarity, both men understood. Everything was about to change. The path forward was dangerous, but clear. Elliot began methodically shutting down his equipment, securing their evidence for the night, triple-checking his encryption protocols. Jameson remained at the window, his mind already mapping out their next moves, weighing risks against justice. The recording had given them exactly what they needed: proof of judicial misconduct at the highest level, captured in Sloan's own words. Tomorrow would bring the first steps toward accountability. The federal courthouse loomed against the pale morning sky, its marble columns catching the first hints of dawn. Jameson Green stood at the base of the steps, briefcase in hand, his suit pressed and perfect despite the early hour. The weight of the folder inside felt like both burden and hope. His fingers tightened around the handle, drawing strength from its solid presence. A few early morning workers hurried past, their footsteps echoing across the empty plaza. But Jameson remained still, taking in the building's imposing facade. He'd stood before countless courthouses in his career, but never with so much personal stake in the outcome. This time, his daughter's lives hung in the balance. The security guard nodded in recognition as Jameson passed through the metal detector. "Morning, sir," he murmured respectfully. Jameson's footsteps echoed through the empty corridors, past dark offices and silent chambers. The building hadn't fully awakened yet, but Judge Marilyn Dorsey was known for starting her days before sunrise, a dedication he was counting on today. Elliot waited outside her chambers, laptop balanced on his knees, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he'd been up all night. He stood when he saw Jameson approach, smoothing his rumpled shirt. "Everything's in order," he said quietly. "Triple-checked the exhibits myself. Not a single detail out of place." Jameson gave a slight nod. "The audio file?" "Enhanced and authenticated. Chain of custody documented. Rock solid, sir." Before Jameson could respond, the heavy wooden door opened. Judge Dorsey's clerk, a thin woman with efficient movements, gestured them inside without a word. Judge Marilyn Dorsey sat behind a massive oak desk, her silver hair pulled back severely, reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. Family photos stood in simple frames to her right, a reminder that beneath her judicial robes beat a human heart. She had a reputation for being tough but scrupulously fair, exactly what they needed in this fight against corruption. "Attorney General Green," she said, not looking up from the document she was reading. "You're early." "Your Honor." Jameson stepped forward and placed the folder on her desk. "Thank you for seeing me before regular hours. I wouldn't have asked if it wasn't urgent." She glanced up then, her sharp eyes taking in both men. "When the U.S. Attorney General requests an emergency meeting, I make time." She opened the folder with careful fingers. "Though I admit, I'm curious why you're personally handling what appears to be a state-level case." "If you'll review the evidence, Your Honor, I believe the federal implications will become clear." Jameson kept his voice steady, professional, though his heart hammered against his ribs. Judge Dorsey began reading, her expression neutral. Years of experience had taught her to mask her reactions, but subtle signs showed through: a slight tightening around her eyes, a barely perceptible shake of her head, the occasional sharp intake of breath. Each page turned with deliberate care. The room fell silent except for the soft sound of turning pages. Jameson stood perfectly still, hands clasped behind his back, counting heartbeats. Elliot shifted his weight from foot to foot, the only outward sign of tension. The wall clock ticked loudly, marking precious seconds. When she reached the audio file transcript, Judge Dorsey paused. "This recording has been authenticated?" Her finger underlined a particularly damning passage. "Yes, Your Honor. Full technical analysis included in Exhibit C. The voice analysis confirms it's Judge Sloan speaking." She continued reading, moving through Dale Stinton's documented confession, the medical records showing Maya's declining health, the detailed breakdown of trial irregularities. Each page added another layer to the picture of corruption and injustice. her lips pressed into a thin line as the evidence mounted. Finally, she closed the folder and removed her glasses. Her face had hardened into granite. 7 days, she said firmly. Be ready. Jameson felt his chest tighten, but his voice remained steady. Thank you, Your Honor. Don't thank me yet, Mr. Green. You've shown enough for an emergency hearing, but you'll need to prove every allegation in that folder. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. And you should expect significant resistance from the local judiciary. Judge Sloan has powerful friends. We're prepared for that, Your Honor. Jameson met her gaze without flinching. She nodded once, dismissing them. As they turned to leave, she added, Mr. Green, the law serves justice, not the other way around. It's time someone reminded them of that. A hint of steel in her voice promised she wouldn't back down. Outside in the corridor, Elliot let out a long breath. 7 days, that's fast. He loosened his tie with shaking fingers. It has to be, Jameson replied, already pulling out his phone. He scrolled to Miss Lila's number, pausing briefly before pressing dial. This call would change everything. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm despite the early hour. Mr. Green? We have a date, he said simply. There was a sharp intake of breath, then silence. When Miss Lila spoke again, her voice trembled. When? 7 days from today, federal court. A sob broke through the phone line. Oh Lord, she whispered. I've been praying for this. Every night I've been praying. My girls, my sweet girls. Jameson felt something catch in his throat. Miss Lila. You just tell me what you need, Mr. Green. Anything at all. Those girls. Her voice broke again. Those precious girls deserve their day in court. A real court this time. Not that mockery of justice they got before. We'll be in touch about the details, he assured her. Try to rest now. Save your strength for what's coming. After a few more exchanges, Jameson ended the call. He stood there for a moment, phone in hand, feeling the weight of Miss Lila's tears and prayers, of Maya's hidden illness, of Celeste's rage against concrete walls. The faces of his daughters flashed in his mind, daughters he'd never known until they were already lost to the system. Tucking the phone into his pocket, he descended the courthouse steps. The sun had fully risen now, painting the marble in warm gold. For the first time since this journey began, since discovering he had daughters, since learning of their imprisonment, since starting this fight, Jameson Green smiled. It was small, barely visible, but it carried the weight of hope. 7 days to save his children. The countdown had begun. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Jameson moved through the final security checkpoint at Lakefield Correctional Center. His suit jacket and tie had been left behind, along with his phone, wallet, and the trappings of his position. Here he was stripped down to just a man, a father about to meet his daughters for the first time. The weight of this moment pressed on his shoulders more heavily than any legal brief ever had. The guards' keys jingled as they walked down a sterile hallway. Their footsteps echoed against concrete floors, past rows of heavy metal doors. The air smelled of industrial cleaner and something else. The heavy weight of contained despair. Each breath felt like inhaling sorrow itself. The visitation room was small, barely larger than a storage closet. A thick pane of reinforced glass divided it in half, with 2 plastic chairs on his side and a metal bench bolted to the floor on the other. The fluorescent light cast harsh shadows, making the room feel even more institutional. Scratches on the glass told stories of countless desperate conversations. Jameson sat down, his hands resting on his knees. His heart pounded against his ribs as he waited. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the door on the other side opened with a metallic groan that matched the knot in his stomach. Celeste Green entered, chains clinking with each step. The orange jumpsuit hung loose on her frame, but she held herself straight, defiant. Her eyes, so much like her mother's, fixed on him with a burning intensity that nearly made him flinch. The guard secured her chains to a metal loop in the floor, then left without a word, the door closing with a final sounding click. Jameson leaned forward slightly. Celeste, he said softly, his voice barely carrying through the small speaker in the glass. She didn't respond. Her jaw was set, her hands clenched in her lap despite the shackles. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken accusations. Her stare felt like a physical force pushing against him. "I know this must be," he began, searching for words adequate to bridge 18 years of absence. "Don't," she cut him off. Her voice was rough, as if she hadn't used it in days. "Don't pretend you know anything about what this must be like." Each word was sharp-edged, designed to wound. Jameson nodded slowly. "You're right. I don't." The admission hung in the air between them, honest in its simplicity. More silence. Celeste stared at a point just past his shoulder, refusing to meet his eyes. The chains rattled slightly as she shifted position, the sound amplifying her captivity. "I've filed for a retrial," he said finally. "We have new evidence, things that were hidden during the first trial, things that should have protected you both." "Why now?" The question burst from her like a bullet. Her eyes snapped to his face, narrowed with suspicion. "You knew her. You knew Mom. Why didn't you come?" Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. The pain in her voice hit him like a physical blow. "I never knew about you," he said quietly. "Either of you. If I had..." He leaned forward, pressing his palm against the glass. "If I had known, I would have come running. I would have moved heaven and earth to find you." His voice thickened with emotion he couldn't contain. "Liar!" she spat, but there was a tremor in her voice now, a hairline fracture in her armor of anger. "I'm not lying, Celeste. I loved your mother. But she disappeared before..." He swallowed hard. "Before she could tell me about you. I've spent the last week trying to understand how I missed this. How I didn't know I had daughters." The words tasted bitter, an admission of his greatest failure. Celeste's laugh was bitter. "We've already been sentenced. Doesn't change anything now." Her shoulders hunched slightly, as if bearing an invisible weight. Before Jameson could respond, the door opened again. Maya entered, moving slowly, carefully. Her face was pale, lips almost colorless, with dark shadows beneath her eyes. The guard helped her sit on the bench beside Celeste, the chains seeming too heavy for her thin frame. She looked like a breeze might blow her away. "Maya," Jameson whispered, his chest tightening at her obvious illness. She looked so fragile, yet somehow still beautiful in a way that squeezed his heart. She looked at him with tired eyes, but there was something else there, a quiet strength, an assessment. "You think saving us now makes you a father?" she asked softly, without the venom of her sister, but with no less impact. He met her gaze steadily. "But maybe it makes me a man who's finally trying to be one." The truth of it settled in his bones. Maya's expression softened slightly. Beside her, Celeste shifted uncomfortably, glancing between them. "The retrial starts in 7 days," Jameson continued. "We have proof of judicial misconduct, evidence that was suppressed, witnesses who were silenced." He looked between them. "I need you both to hold on just a little longer, please." Maya coughed, a harsh sound that seemed to rattle in her chest. Celeste immediately reached for her sister, but the chains restricted her movement. The frustration on her face was raw, painful to witness. Her helplessness to comfort Maya seemed to hurt her more than her own situation. "Are you receiving medical care?" Jameson asked, trying to keep his voice steady while alarm bells rang in his head. "They give me pills," Maya said. "Sometimes." She shrugged slightly, as if her neglect was something she'd grown accustomed to. "I've requested a full medical evaluation as part of the retrial motion. It'll happen tomorrow, first thing." Celeste's head snapped up. "They're killing her," she said fiercely. "Slowly. And nobody cares." Her hands twisted in her lap, metal biting into her wrists. "I care," Jameson replied, his voice rough with emotion. "And I'm not nobody anymore. I'm your father, and I'm the Attorney General of the United States, and I'm going to fix this." The promise felt sacred, carved into his heart. Maya leaned forward slightly. "What if you can't?" Her question held no accusation, only a quiet acceptance of possibility that broke his heart. The question hung in the air between them. Jameson pressed both hands against the glass now, wishing he could reach through and touch them, hold them, protect them the way he should have been doing for the past 18 years. The barrier between them felt like the physical manifestation of his failure. "Then I'll die trying," he said simply. 3 words, but he meant them with every fiber of his being. Something shifted in Celeste's expression, not quite softening, but perhaps a crack in the wall of her anger. A tiny opening he might someday walk through. Maya coughed again, and this time Jameson could see a small spot of red on her sleeve when she lowered her arm. His stomach clenched with fear that tasted metallic in his mouth. "Time's up," called a guard from the doorway, indifferent to the moment being severed. Maya stood slowly, steadying herself against the wall. She approached the glass, raising her shackled hands as high as they would go. Gently, she pressed her palm against the barrier. "Don't wait too long," she whispered, her eyes holding a knowledge beyond her years. Jameson watched helplessly as the guards led them away, Maya moving with painful slowness, Celeste looking back once with an unreadable expression. The door closed behind them with a heavy metallic clang that echoed in his chest. He remained seated, staring at the empty bench on the other side of the glass. His heart felt like it was being torn apart, piece by piece. Somewhere in this building, his daughters were being led back to their cells, one burning with rage, the other fading like a dying star, both carrying wounds he should have prevented, both bearing his blood and a stranger's face. The guard cleared his throat from the doorway. "Sir, we need to clear the room." His tone was respectful but firm. Jameson stood slowly, his legs unsteady. On the glass, he could still see the faint outline of Maya's handprint, a ghost of connection that disappeared as he watched. His chest ached with a pain that felt physical, crushing. He had 7 days to save them, 7 days to become the father they deserved. Maya lay on the thin mattress of her solitary cell, her body curled tight like a wounded animal. The melody she'd written days ago whispered through her mind, a lifeline in the darkness. Her fingers, usually so steady when writing music, trembled as they pressed against her side where the pain had become unbearable. The concrete walls seemed to close in around her, the air thick and heavy. Each breath came shorter than the last. Maya tried to focus on the notes in her head, the song she'd composed about second chances, but even that was starting to fade like a radio losing signal. "Just keep breathing," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible in the stillness. "Remember the melody." But the notes were swimming together now, blurring like watercolors in the rain. The pain in her chest flared again, sharper this time. Maya pressed her hand harder against her side, feeling her heart racing beneath her palm. Something was wrong, more wrong than usual. Her condition had never felt quite like this before. The familiar flutter had turned into a hammering that sent waves of nausea through her body. "Help!" she called out weakly, her voice catching in her throat. "Please, somebody." The words disappeared into the empty corridor beyond her door. In solitary, voices didn't carry far. That was the point. No one to hear your cries, your pleas, your prayers. Maya pushed herself up, fighting against the dizziness that made the cell spin around her. The metal door seemed miles away, though it was only a few feet. She had to reach it, had to make someone hear her. The guard had to be somewhere nearby. They always were, weren't they? Her legs shook as she tried to stand. The floor tilted beneath her feet like the deck of a ship in a storm. Maya took one stumbling step forward, then another. Her fingertips brushed the cold metal of the door, but before she could bang on it, her knees buckled. She crumpled to the floor, her cheek pressed against the cold concrete. Her Bible lay just out of reach where it had fallen from her bed, pages splayed open like broken wings. The carefully folded pieces of toilet paper with her musical notes peeked out from between the pages, her secret songs, her silent prayers, little scraps of heaven in this hellish place. Hours passed in a haze of semi-consciousness. Maya drifted in and out, aware only of the pain and the growing difficulty of drawing breath. Sometimes she thought she heard footsteps in the corridor, but no one came. The night stretched endless around her, marked only by the shallow rise and fall of her chest. Time lost all meaning in the darkness. A warm wetness trickled from her nose, then her mouth. She could taste copper on her lips. In the dim light, she could see dark spots staining the edges of her precious sheet music, where it had fallen from the Bible. Her blood was turning the notes into abstract patterns, washing away the melody she'd worked so hard to preserve. Her life's work dissolving before her eyes. The first gray light of dawn was seeping through the high window when footsteps finally approached. Keys jingled, metal scraped against metal as the food slot opened for morning check. "Inmate Green?" The guard's voice was bored, routine. Then a sharp intake of breath. "Green." Maya couldn't respond. Her body felt distant, disconnected, like she was floating somewhere near the ceiling, looking down at herself. She was vaguely aware of the door being thrown open, of hands checking her pulse, of voices growing increasingly urgent. They seemed to be moving in slow motion while she drifted away. "Medical emergency in Block D," the guard's radio crackled with static. "Inmate down, unresponsive." The corridor outside erupted with activity. Running feet, shouting voices, the squeak of wheels on linoleum. Maya felt herself being lifted onto something hard and flat. The ceiling tiles blurred past overhead as they rushed her down the hallway, faces appearing and disappearing above her like clouds. Sirens began to wail throughout the prison compound, their shrill cry echoing off the walls. Maya's gurney crashed through double doors, turned corners, raced past cells where other inmates pressed against the bars to see what was happening. Some called out her name, voices she recognized but couldn't answer. Her chest barely moved now, each breath a desperate struggle. The melody in her head had gone silent, replaced by the sound of urgent voices and blaring alarms. The last thing she was aware of was the feeling of cool air on her face as they wheeled her through another set of doors, rushing her toward help that should have come hours before. Someone was holding her hand now, squeezing it tight. The sirens continued their mournful song, a very different melody from the one Maya had written about second chances, a melody now stained with blood and fading like her consciousness into the growing dark. As she slipped away, she wondered if anyone would ever hear the music she'd kept locked inside her heart. The automatic doors of St. Elizabeth's Hospital slid open with a hiss as Miss Lila and Jameson rushed through them, their footsteps echoing against the sterile tile floor. The antiseptic smell hit them immediately, that unmistakable hospital scent that always carried hints of fear. Ahead of them, a team of medical staff surrounded a gurney, their voices urgent and overlapping as they wheeled Maya toward the ICU. "BP dropping, we need to stabilize. Get cardiology down here, stat. O2 levels critical." Jameson's world narrowed to the glimpse of Maya's pale face between the shoulders of rushing nurses. She looked so small against the white hospital sheets, an oxygen mask covering most of her features. Her dark hair splayed across the pillow like spilled ink. The machines attached to her beeped with alarming frequency, each sound a reminder of how fragile life could be. Miss Lila's hand found his arm, steadying him as they followed the medical team down the fluorescent-lit corridor. Her touch was firm, grounding, though he could feel the slight tremor in her fingers. She'd been through this before, he realized, watching children she cared for suffer. "This way," a nurse directed them to a waiting area, her voice gentle but firm. "The doctors will update you as soon as they can." Through a set of double doors, they found Celeste sitting rigid in a plastic chair, her wrists cuffed, and a correctional officer standing nearby. Her eyes were fixed on the floor, but her hands shook violently in her lap. Two more officers stood at attention by the exits, their faces impassive as if this was just another day on the job. "Celeste," Miss Lila whispered, moving toward her. But before she could reach the girl, Dr. Rani Desai emerged from the ICU, her dark hair pulled back severely from her face, her expression carefully neutral in the way only doctors delivering bad news could manage. "Mr. Green?" she asked, consulting a tablet. "I'm Dr. Desai. We need to discuss your daughter's condition." Jameson stepped forward, his throat tight. "How bad?" Dr. Desai's eyes softened slightly, a crack in her professional armor. "Maya's heart condition is severe. We've found records from juvenile detention indicating it was diagnosed years ago, but..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "There's no indication of any follow-up care or treatment. Not even basic medication that could have prevented this crisis." The words hit Jameson like physical blows. Years ago. Years of his daughter suffering, unnoticed, untreated. A child slipping through cracks he never knew existed. If she survives, Dr. Desai continued, her voice steady but gentle, it'll be because she fought harder than the system did. We're doing everything we can, but her heart has sustained significant damage from years of neglect. From her chair, Celeste made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. The system, she spat, still not looking up. The system that threw us away? Miss Lila moved to sit beside Celeste, ignoring the officer's warning look. She didn't touch the girl, but her presence seemed to steady her slightly, like an anchor in a storm. Can we see her? Jameson asked, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't hide. Dr. Desai nodded. Briefly, she's unconscious and we're monitoring her closely, one at a time. Celeste's head snapped up. I want to go first. Her eyes finally met Jameson's, challenging him to object, daring him to claim a right he hadn't earned. After a quick consultation with the officers, they agreed to let Celeste approach the ICU window, though not enter the room. Miss Lila and Jameson watched from a distance as she pressed her cuffed hands against the glass, her forehead resting against it, her breath making small clouds on the cold surface. Through the window, Maya lay still and pale, surrounded by beeping monitors and IV lines. Her chest rose and fell with mechanical precision, aided by machines. The girl who made music was now dependent on the rhythm of artificial assistance. Celeste's shoulders shook, but she made no sound, her grief too deep for tears. When her time was up, the officers led her back to the chair. As she passed Jameson, she whispered, "She wrote you a song, you know. Called it Second Chances. Guess she believed in those more than I did." The words twisted in Jameson's chest like a knife. He approached the window himself, Miss Lila, a steady presence beside him. The sight of Maya, his daughter, his responsibility, the child he'd never known needed him, lying there so broken made his knees weak. All those years, he murmured, more to himself than to Miss Lila. I should have known. Should have looked harder. You're here now, Miss Lila replied softly, her voice warm with forgiveness he didn't deserve. That's what matters. But Jameson could only see what his absence had cost. Every beep of the heart monitor seemed to echo with accusation. Every tube and wire spoke of years of neglect. His hand came up to touch the glass, as if he could reach through it and somehow make this right, somehow turn back time. I will not let this be how it ends, he whispered, his breath fogging the window between him and his daughter. The promise felt sacred in the sterile air. The ICU lights cast harsh shadows across Maya's face, making her look even younger than her 17 years. A child, really. His child. Machines continued their rhythmic beeping, marking each precious heartbeat of a girl who had been failed by everyone who should have protected her. Jameson pressed his palm harder against the glass, as if through sheer will he could transfer his strength to her. The chapel sat in darkness, illuminated only by the soft glow of emergency exit signs and a few flickering prayer candles near the altar. Jameson Green occupied the last pew, his normally pristine suit wrinkled, his tie loose around his neck. His elbows rested on his knees as he stared at nothing, the weight of the day visible in every line of his body. The shadows under his eyes told of sleepless nights and the constant worry that had become his unwelcome companion. The door creaked softly as Miss Lila entered. Her practical shoes made little sound on the carpeted floor as she approached, but Jameson didn't look up. She paused at his pew, then quietly sat beside him. For several long moments they shared the silence, the kind that exists between people who understand that sometimes words aren't enough. I thought I might find you here, she said finally, her voice gentle in the darkness, like a hand reaching out. Jameson's laugh was hollow, empty of any real humor. Where else would I be? Can't do anything up there. He gestured vaguely toward the ICU floors above, his hand trembling slightly. Can't fix this with a legal brief or a court order. No, Miss Lila agreed. You can't. His hands clenched into fists, knuckles white with tension. I've spent my whole career making things right, finding justice, winning. His voice cracked on the last word, betraying the emotion he fought to contain. But this, I'm watching my daughter die because I wasn't there, because I didn't know, because the system I serve failed her. Jameson. I've won every case but the one that matters, he said, the words coming out raw and broken. His shoulders began to shake with silent sobs. Every single one. And what good is any of it if I can't save her? Miss Lila reached out and placed a steady hand on his trembling shoulder, her touch warm and grounding. Then win it now. He turned to look at her, his eyes red-rimmed and desperate, searching her face for answers. How? Tell me how, because right now all I see is everything I didn't do. Every birthday I missed, every Christmas, every time they needed someone to stand up for them and I wasn't there. Stop. Miss Lila's voice was firm but kind, like a lighthouse in a storm. Stop chasing justice like it's some trophy to put on your shelf. These aren't case files anymore, Jameson. These are your daughters. They need a father more than they need an attorney general. The truth of her words seemed to break something in him. His carefully maintained composure crumbled, and tears began to fall freely down his cheeks. I don't know how to be that, he whispered. I don't know how to fix this. Maybe that's the problem right there, Miss Lila said softly, her eyes full of compassion. You're still trying to fix everything instead of just loving them through it. Justice and love can walk together, Jameson. One doesn't have to cancel out the other. He wiped roughly at his eyes with the back of his hand. I keep thinking about Maya's face when I first saw her in that prison. She looked right through me, like she already knew I'd fail her again. That's your guilt talking, Miss Lila said, shaking her head gently. And guilt's a heavy thing to carry, but it's not a plan. Those girls need you present and fighting, not drowning in what-ifs. Jameson's breathing was uneven as he struggled to compose himself, his chest rising and falling in irregular patterns. I don't deserve their forgiveness. Probably not, Miss Lila agreed, surprising him with her honesty. But that's the beautiful thing about grace. It's not about deserving. It's about choosing to do better now that you know better. She squeezed his shoulder, her grip firm and reassuring. So what are you going to choose, Jameson? He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the dim outline of the cross at the front of the chapel. When he spoke again, his voice was different, stripped of its usual authority and precision, leaving only the raw voice of a father. I choose them, not the case, not the legal victory, them. Miss Lila nodded, a small smile touching her lips. Then start there. Stop looking at Maya's medical charts like evidence and start holding her hand like a father. Stop analyzing Celeste's anger and start accepting it as part of her healing. Be the father they needed then by being the father they need now. Jameson turned to face her fully, his expression vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before, all his carefully constructed walls momentarily down. I'm scared, he admitted. What if it's too late? It's never too late to love your children, Miss Lila said firmly, her eyes bright with conviction. Never. But you have to let go of the man who wins cases and be the man who fights for his daughters, win or lose. The first hints of dawn began to creep through the stained glass windows, casting soft colors across the chapel floor, blues, reds, and golds dancing together. Jameson looked up at the ceiling, where the early light was beginning to paint patterns in blues and golds that seemed to shimmer with new possibility. She survives this, he said, his voice steady despite the tears drying on his face, a new determination hardening his features. And I swear, they'll never feel abandoned again. Outside the chapel, the sky began to lighten with dawn, promising a new day, and perhaps a new beginning. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dirt road as Jameson's rental car kicked up dust, winding its way through the outskirts of town. Gone was the crisp suit and commanding presence of the Attorney General. Today he wore a plain navy windbreaker and jeans, just another man on a mission, a father seeking justice. The GPS directed him down a narrow lane lined with overgrown weeds until a rusty mailbox marked Stinton came into view. Beyond it sat a weathered trailer home, its white paint peeling to reveal patches of dull metal underneath. Empty beer cans littered the small wooden porch, and a mangy dog dozed beneath a crooked satellite dish, barely bothered by the approaching visitor. Jameson parked and sat for a moment, his hands tight on the steering wheel. The rage he'd been containing since Maya's collapse simmered just beneath the surface. His daughter's pale face in that hospital bed flashed in his mind. But this wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, the kind that could finally set things right. He stepped out of the car, gravel crunching under his shoes. The dog lifted its head lazily but didn't move, just watched him with tired eyes. Each step up the rickety porch stairs felt deliberate, purposeful. The wood creaked beneath his weight as Jameson's knock echoed against the thin metal door. Shuffling sounds came from inside, followed by muttered cursing. The door creaked open just enough for Dale Stinton to peer out, his bloodshot eyes widening with recognition. The smell of stale beer and cigarettes wafted through the gap. "What do you want?" Stinton's voice was rough, defensive. He tried to project toughness, but fear flickered across his unshaven face. His fingers gripped the door frame, knuckles white. "We need to talk," Jameson said quietly. "Just talk." His tone was calm, but left no room for argument. "I got nothing to say to you." Stinton started to close the door, but Jameson's palm pressed against it, not forcing it open, just holding steady, patient but unmovable. "My daughter almost died last night," Jameson said, his voice low and controlled. "Her heart nearly stopped because a system that should have protected her chose to bury her instead. You were part of that system, Dale." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with accusation and truth. Stinton's face twitched. He glanced past Jameson to the empty road, then reluctantly opened the door wider. The interior of the trailer was dark and cluttered, empty takeout containers scattered across a coffee table. A small TV flickered in the corner, volume turned low. "You may not care about them," Jameson continued, stepping inside, "but you'll care about what happens when this comes out. All of it. Every detail, every cover-up, every person involved." His shoes stuck slightly to the linoleum floor. Stinton collapsed onto a worn recliner, running his hands through his thinning hair. "You don't understand. They've got their hooks in everything. Everyone." His voice cracked with genuine fear. "I understand perfectly," Jameson replied. "But right now, I'm not here as the Attorney General. I'm here as a father who's watched his daughters suffer while good men stayed silent." He remained standing, his presence filling the small space. Something in Jameson's tone made Stinton look up. The morning light filtering through dirty windows caught the tears in his eyes. A broken man hiding in a broken home. "They told me to stay quiet," he whispered. "Told me if I opened my mouth I'd be next." His shoulders slumped. "But I see their faces sometimes. Your girls. The way they looked that night, scared and confused. I knew something wasn't right, but I just followed orders." He wiped his nose with the back of his hand. Jameson reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document and pen. He placed them on the coffee table between them, pushing aside an empty pizza box. "Tell me everything," he said. "Start from the beginning." The pen gleamed in the dim light, a tool of redemption. The words poured out of Stinton like a broken dam. How he'd been first on scene that night, how the girls had been peaceful, not resisting. How Sheriff Hendricks had arrived and immediately radioed Judge Sloan instead of following protocol. How evidence disappeared, timestamps were altered, and witness statements were buried. His hands shook as he spoke, years of guilt finding release. "They needed someone to make an example of," Stinton said, his voice hollow. "Judge Sloan picked your girls because they were outsiders, because their mother was gone and their father was—" He trailed off, glancing at Jameson, shame written across his face. "Unknown," Jameson finished quietly, the word carrying the weight of his absence. "Continue." For nearly an hour, Stinton spoke while Jameson took detailed notes. The trailer grew warmer as the sun rose higher, but neither man noticed. When the story was complete, Jameson drafted a sworn statement, each paragraph capturing another piece of the corrupt puzzle that had nearly destroyed his family. Stinton's hand shook as he picked up the pen. "They'll come for me," he said, fear returning to his eyes. "You'll have federal protection," Jameson assured him. "But first we need the truth. All of it." His gaze was steady, offering both challenge and promise. The scratching of pen on paper filled the trailer as Stinton signed his name. He stared at his signature for a long moment before saying quietly, "I didn't know it would go this far." The confession of a man who'd looked away when it mattered most. Jameson carefully folded the affidavit and tucked it into his jacket, close to his heart. "You knew enough," he replied, then turned and walked out of the trailer, his steps quick and purposeful as he headed back to his car. The truth was finally in his hands, not just pieces and suspicions, but the full, damning story. Every altered timeline, every false arrest report, every buried witness statement. The evidence that would bring down not just a corrupt judge but an entire system that had failed his daughters. With each step, Jameson felt the weight of fatherhood settle more firmly on his shoulders, no longer a title, but a calling he was finally ready to answer. The morning fog hung thick and heavy, clinging to the ground like a ghostly blanket as a black government-issued SUV crawled silently along the dirt road leading to Dale Stinton's trailer. The vehicle's headlights cut through the murky dawn, illuminating swirling patches of mist that danced and parted before the approaching vehicle. 2 FBI agents in dark suits emerged from the vehicle, their movements precise and practiced, faces set with professional determination. Miles away, in a quiet corner of St. Elizabeth's Hospital cafeteria, Jameson Green sat hunched over a secure laptop, his tired eyes fixed on the live feed streaming from one of the agent's body cameras. Deep shadows hung beneath his eyes, testament to sleepless nights and relentless worry. The institutional smell of coffee and disinfectant hung in the air, but he barely noticed it. His focus remained absolute, watching justice finally take shape through the grainy digital feed that represented months of painstaking legal work. Elliot Barnes settled into the plastic chair beside him, placing 2 untouched cups of coffee on the scratched Formica table. Steam rose from the cups, curling into the air between them. The cafeteria was nearly empty at this early hour, just a few nurses ending their night shifts and the occasional orderly passing through, their rubber-soled shoes squeaking against the polished floor. The quiet made the tinny audio from the laptop seem unusually loud in the cavernous space. On screen, the FBI agents approached Stinton's front door. The old dog that had been there yesterday was nowhere to be seen, not even a bark to announce the visitors. One agent knocked firmly while the other positioned himself strategically to the side, hand ready near his weapon, eyes scanning the perimeter with practiced vigilance. "Dale Stinton." The agent's voice was clear and authoritative, cutting through the morning stillness. "Federal Bureau of Investigation. Please open the door." There was a long pause and Jameson's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching along his cheek. Then came the sound of locks being undone, metal sliding against metal, and the door creaked open on protesting hinges. Dale Stinton appeared in the doorway, wearing a stained white undershirt and wrinkled pants that looked slept in. His face showed no surprise, only resignation, as if he'd been waiting for this moment to finally arrive. "Step outside, Mr. Stinton," the agent commanded. "Keep your hands where we can see them." Stinton complied without argument, raising his hands slowly as he descended the rickety porch steps that groaned under his weight. The morning mist swirled around his ankles as he moved, like ghostly fingers trying to hold him back. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, nothing like the swaggering ex-cop who had sneered about making things stick just days ago. The bravado had drained away, leaving only a hollow shell. The agents moved with practiced efficiency, securing his wrists behind his back with handcuffs that clicked shut with quiet finality. The sound echoed in Jameson's ears like a promise fulfilled. As they led him toward the waiting SUV, Stinton turned his head once, looking back at the trailer that had been his hiding place for so long. His expression was unreadable in the gray morning light, but something like defeat shadowed his features. Elliot leaned forward, watching intently, his breath fogging slightly in the air-conditioned chill of the cafeteria. "It's really happening," he whispered, more to himself than to Jameson, a note of wonder in his voice. The laptop screen suddenly split, showing the arrest feed on one side and a breaking news ticker on the other. Bold letters scrolled across the bottom. "Breaking. Ex-cop arrested in connection with Green case. The news was spreading faster than they'd anticipated, like wildfire through dry brush. Within minutes, more updates followed, each one flashing across the screen with urgent immediacy. Former Officer Dale Stinton taken into federal custody. Questions arise about police misconduct in controversial Green twins case. Sources suggest cover-up reaching highest levels of local law enforcement. Jameson sat completely still, his face illuminated by the screen's blue glow, highlighting the lines of exhaustion and determination etched into his features. This was the momentum they'd needed, the first very public crack in the wall of silence that had protected the corruption for so long. He watched as more news alerts popped up, each one another piece of the truth breaking free, like water finally finding its way through a crumbling dam. His phone buzzed with a message from the federal prosecutor's office. Stinton in custody. Charges filed. Proceeding as discussed. The legal machinery was finally grinding into motion, picking up speed with each passing moment, unstoppable now that it had begun. Elliot's eyes were wide as he scrolled through the rapidly updating news feeds on his tablet, the light reflecting off his glasses. "It's everywhere," he said quietly, a note of awe in his voice. "Every major outlet is picking it up. They're already digging into Stinton's history. The misconduct reports, the quiet dismissal, everything we found. It's like watching dominoes fall in real time." The footage showed Stinton being placed in the back of the SUV, his head ducked low as if avoiding invisible cameras. The door closed with a solid thunk that seemed to punctuate this chapter of the story. The agents moved with continued efficiency, securing the scene and preparing to transport their prisoner. This was just the beginning, but it was the beginning they'd needed after so long in darkness. "Sir," Elliot said, glancing at his phone as it buzzed repeatedly in his hand. "The U.S. Attorney's Office in Atlanta is requesting a statement. So is the Washington Post. They want to know if you'll comment on the arrest." Jameson didn't respond immediately. He watched as the SUV pulled away from Stinton's trailer, tires crunching on gravel before disappearing into the morning fog like a ghost retreating at daybreak. The truth was finally emerging from the shadows, and there would be no pushing it back down, no matter how hard the opposition might try. With deliberate movements, Jameson reached forward and closed the laptop with a soft click. "The dominoes are falling," he said simply, his voice low but certain, carrying the weight of a man who had waited too long for justice. He stood up, leaving his untouched coffee on the table, and stepped away from the small cafeteria table with renewed purpose in his stride. He moved toward the hallway that would take him back to Maya's room, back to where the real heart of this fight lay. His footsteps echoed in the quiet corridor, matching the steady rhythm of his thoughts. The hearing loomed ahead, but for now each step was taking him closer to where he needed to be, with his daughter, where promises made would finally be kept. The fluorescent lights of the small TV station green room buzzed overhead as Mara Jensen smoothed her navy blazer for the 10th time. Her hands trembled slightly as she watched the studio crew adjust cameras and check lighting levels through the glass partition. After years of staying silent, of carrying the weight of what she knew, this moment felt surreal. The knot in her stomach tightened with each passing minute. A young production assistant touched her elbow gently. "5 minutes, Miss Jensen." Mara nodded, her throat tight. She thought about all the nights she'd laid awake, Judge Sloan's words echoing in her head. "These girls, they need to be made an example." Those words had haunted her dreams for too long. The makeup artist made a final touch-up to Mara's face, dabbing away a bead of nervous sweat from her temple. "You'll do great," she whispered kindly, noticing Mara's tension. "Just tell the truth." The truth. Such a simple concept, yet it had become so tangled in this case. Mara remembered the day she'd first heard Sloan's private jury instructions, how her stomach had knotted as she realized what was happening. She'd kept her recorder running out of instinct, knowing deep down that something was terribly wrong. The memory still made her hands clammy. 2 minutes, called the floor director, holding up 2 fingers for emphasis. In the studio, Sharon Chen, the veteran news anchor, adjusted her earpiece and reviewed her notes one last time. The story had already begun making waves. A court clerk with explosive evidence about judicial misconduct in the Green twins case. But now, With Mara's face and name attached to it, everything would change. There would be no going back. The red light blinked on. Good afternoon, I'm Sharon Chen. Today we have an exclusive interview with Mara Jensen, a former court clerk who has come forward with disturbing allegations about judicial misconduct in the controversial Green twins case. Mara sat straight-backed in her chair, hands clasped in her lap to keep them from shaking. As Sharon asked the first question, Mara took a deep breath and began speaking, her voice growing stronger with each word. The fear that had kept her silent for so long began to melt away. I was there that day in Judge Sloan's chambers, she said clearly. He thought the recording system was off, but I had my own device running. It was standard procedure for clerks to maintain backup records. What I heard, what he said about those girls. She paused, collecting herself. He made it clear that their guilt or innocence didn't matter. He wanted to make an example of them because of who they were, where they came from. The interview continued, with Mara methodically laying out everything she'd witnessed. She described how Sloan had manipulated jury selection, how he'd given different instructions in private than in open court, how he'd threatened her job if she spoke up. Each revelation seemed to lift a weight from her shoulders. I was afraid, she admitted, her eyes glistening. I had bills to pay, a mother in assisted living. But every night, I thought about those girls sitting in prison, and I knew I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent any longer. Sometimes doing the right thing means facing your fears. Across town, in his oak-paneled office, Judge Whitman Sloan watched the broadcast with a face like stone. His hands gripped the arms of his leather chair so tightly his knuckles showed white. When Mara played the audio recording, his own voice damning him with every word, he reached for his phone with trembling fingers. His carefully constructed world was crumbling around him. The story exploded across social media platforms within hours. Justice for Green began trending nationally. News outlets picked up the story, running side-by-side images of the twins' mugshots with Sloan's official judicial portrait. Legal analysts appeared on every major network, discussing the implications of such blatant judicial misconduct. The public outcry was immediate and deafening. In the hospital waiting room, Jameson Green watched the coverage unfold on the mounted TV, his expression unreadable. Nurses and doctors paused in their rounds, drawn to the unfolding story. Even some of the guards stationed outside Maya's room found themselves glancing at the screens, their faces betraying their shock. By evening, the pressure had become unbearable. Judge Sloan's office released a terse statement announcing his immediate resignation from the bench and submission to the state bar. The carefully worded document made no admission of wrongdoing, but its timing spoke volumes. The mighty had fallen. The Department of Justice announced a formal investigation into the county's entire judicial system within hours. Phones rang continuously in government offices as reporters sought comments and citizens demanded action. The wheels of justice, so long stalled, were finally turning again. Mara Jensen left the TV station through a side door, overwhelmed by the waiting reporters. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages of support and interview requests. She felt lighter somehow, as if speaking the truth had lifted a physical weight from her shoulders. For the first time in years, she slept without nightmares. In Maya's hospital room, the TV played silently, showing footage of Sloan leaving the courthouse for the last time, his head down as reporters shouted questions. Jameson stood at the window, watching the evening sky darken over the parking lot. His phone lit up with a message from Elliot. It's everywhere. Every major network. Jameson picked up the remote and turned up the volume slightly, just in time to hear the breaking news anchor. In a stunning development, Judge Whitman Sloan has resigned amid allegations of judicial misconduct. He turned to Elliot, who had just entered the room with fresh coffee, and said simply, "Now, we go win." A small smile played at the corners of his mouth, the smile of a man who finally saw justice on the horizon. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the hospital window, painting golden stripes across Maya's pale blue blanket. The steady beeping of monitors created a quiet rhythm in the room, almost like a metronome keeping time. Maya's eyes fluttered open at the sound of wheels squeaking against linoleum, her heart quickening with anticipation. Celeste sat in a wheelchair, pushed by a nurse with kind eyes and graying hair. For the first time in weeks, Celeste wore regular clothes instead of prison orange, a simple gray sweater and black pants that hung loose on her frame. No handcuffs bound her wrists, no chains restricted her movement. The sight of her freedom, however temporary, made Maya's chest tighten with emotion. "Take as much time as you need, girls," the nurse said softly, helping Celeste settle next to Maya's bed. "I'll be right outside." The door clicked shut behind her with gentle finality, leaving the twins in a bubble of privacy they hadn't experienced in months. The twins stared at each other, drinking in the sight of familiar features they'd been denied for so long. Maya's face was thinner, her skin almost translucent against the white hospital pillows. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, but they held the same gentle light Celeste remembered. Celeste's knuckles were still scabbed from her battles with the prison walls, but her shoulders had lost their defensive hunch. The hardness around her eyes had softened at the sight of her sister. Tears welled up in both their eyes simultaneously, that twin synchronicity that had always marked their deepest moments. Celeste reached for Maya's hand, careful of the IV line. Her fingers were cold, but they curled weakly around Celeste's, seeking warmth and connection. "You came," Maya whispered, her voice barely louder than the machines tracking her heartbeat. A single tear escaped, trailing down her hollow cheek. Celeste leaned closer, squeezing Maya's hand. "Of course I did." She tried to smile through her tears. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away. Not anymore." Her voice cracked on the last words, betraying the depth of her emotion. Maya's lips trembled. "I was so scared, Cel. Not just about being sick, but..." She took a shaky breath. "I was afraid I'd never see you again, never get to tell you..." The words caught in her throat, too heavy with meaning. "Shh," Celeste soothed, brushing Maya's hair back from her forehead like their mother used to do. "I'm here now. We're together." Her touch was gentle, reverent, as if Maya might break under too much pressure. "I wrote music," Maya said suddenly, her free hand plucking at the blanket. "In there, when it got really dark, I'd hear melodies in my head, beautiful ones, like Mom used to play." Her eyes brightened at the memory, a spark of life amid the pallor. Celeste's throat tightened. "Tell me about them." She leaned in closer, hungry for this glimpse of her sister's inner world. Maya's eyes brightened slightly. "There was this one piece. It started soft, like rainfall, but then it built, like a storm gathering strength. I called it Second Chances." She paused, coughing slightly. "I wrote it thinking about us, about hope." Her fingers twitched on the blanket, as if playing phantom keys. "That sounds perfect," Celeste whispered. She thought about their childhood piano, how Maya's gentle touch had always balanced her own fierce playing style. "Remember when we used to perform at the church socials? You in your purple dress, me always forgetting to iron mine?" A weak laugh escaped Maya. "Miss Lila would try to fix my hair ribbons while you played warm-up scales too fast on purpose." The memory brought color to her cheeks, a fleeting blush of health. "Just to make you giggle," Celeste admitted. She studied their clasped hands, noting how similar they still looked despite everything. "Maya, I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you better. When they separated us, when you got sick..." Guilt shadowed her features, the weight of perceived failure heavy on her shoulders. "Stop," Maya interrupted softly but firmly. "You've always protected me. Even when they pulled us apart, I could feel you fighting. Your strength kept me going." Her thumb stroked Celeste's palm, offering comfort despite her own weakness. Celeste wiped her eyes with her free hand. "I thought I was going to lose you. When they brought me here and said your heart..." She couldn't finish the sentence, the fear still too raw. "But you didn't," Maya assured her. "I'm still here. We both are." She smiled, a small but determined expression of resilience. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the steady beep of the heart monitor. Maya's breathing was still labored, but her color looked better than it had days ago. The doctor said she was stabilizing, though recovery would take time. A bird chirped outside the window as if offering its own message of hope. "Do you think..." Maya hesitated, then continued in a small voice. Do you think we'll ever get to perform again? Together, I mean? The question held all her dreams, fragile but persistent. Celeste's heart ached at the longing in her sister's voice. Yes, she said firmly. I believe we will. She infused the words with all the conviction she could muster. Maya's eyes drifted to the small table beside her bed where her Bible lay. She reached for it weakly, and Celeste helped her lift it. From between its pages, Maya pulled out a carefully folded piece of paper, toilet paper from the prison covered in neat musical notation, the ink slightly smudged but still readable. You'll play it, right? Maya asked, holding out the makeshift sheet music with trembling fingers. Her eyes were wide with hope and fear. Celeste took her sister's hand again, squeezing it gently but firmly. No, she said, her voice full of promise. We'll play it together. The words were a vow, sealed with the strength of their bond. The sunlight had shifted, painting the room in deeper gold. Outside, they could hear the muffled sounds of hospital life continuing. Footsteps, quiet conversations, the distant ding of an elevator. But in that moment, it was just the two of them, hands clasped, hearts beating in sync, the music of their bond humming between them like an unbroken melody. In the golden light, they were children again. Before the world had tried to tear them apart, their connection undiminished by distance or time. The federal courthouse stood tall and imposing against the morning sky, its marble columns gleaming in the early light. Inside, the gallery buzzed with whispered conversations and the rustle of notepads. Journalists lined the back wall, their pens poised. Government officials sat straight-backed in pressed suits, while local observers filled every remaining seat. In the front row, Jameson Green adjusted his tie, his fingers trembling slightly. Miss Lila sat beside him, her gray hair swept back elegantly, her hand resting protectively near Celeste's arm. Celeste wore a simple navy dress, her back straight, her eyes fixed ahead on the empty judge's bench. A large screen had been mounted on the courtroom wall, showing Maya's hospital room via secure video feed. She lay propped up against white pillows, looking small but alert, an IV still attached to her arm. Dr. Desai stood quietly in the background, monitoring her vital signs. All rise, the bailiff called out, the Honorable Judge Marilyn Dorsey presiding. Judge Dorsey entered, her black robes flowing as she took her seat. Her silver hair was pulled back severely, but her eyes were sharp and clear as she surveyed the packed courtroom. Be seated, she commanded, her voice carrying authority without harshness. Mr. Green, she nodded, you may proceed with your opening argument. Jameson stood slowly. He didn't move to the podium. Instead, he turned to face the gallery, his shoulders relaxed, his usual polish stripped away. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. Your Honor, I stand here today not as the Attorney General, but as a father who failed his children before he knew they existed. He paused, glancing at Celeste, then up at Maya's image on the screen. This case isn't about legal precedent. It's about two young women who were erased by a system that saw their color before their humanity. He walked slowly across the front of the courtroom. Celeste and Maya Green were honor students, musicians, daughters, but Judge Whitman Sloan saw them as a threat to what he called order. Former Officer Dale Stinton saw them as a chance to prove his prejudices right. The system saw them as statistics to be filed away and forgotten. Jameson lifted a thick folder. The evidence before this court shows a pattern of judicial misconduct so blatant it borders on criminal. We have Officer Stinton's sworn affidavit detailing how evidence was altered. We have audio recordings of Judge Sloan instructing jury members in private, tainting their verdict before the trial began. We have medical records proving Maya's life-threatening condition was flagged and deliberately ignored. The gallery murmured as each piece of evidence was presented. Judge Dorsey examined the documents carefully, her expression grave. But beyond these papers, Jameson continued, his voice growing stronger, we have the truth of two lives nearly destroyed. Maya Green lies in a hospital bed because the system meant to protect her chose to let her die instead. Celeste Green's knuckles are still scarred from punching concrete walls in solitary confinement. where she was placed for the crime of demanding her sister receive medical care. He turned to face Judge Dorsey directly. "Your Honor, this isn't just about correcting a legal error. It's about redemption, for a system that failed, for a father who wasn't there, for a country that still struggles to see all its children as worthy of protection." When Jameson finished, the courtroom fell silent. Judge Dorsey nodded slowly, then turned to Celeste. "Miss Green, would you like to speak on behalf of yourself and your sister?" Celeste stood, smoothing her dress with steady hands. Her voice, when it came, filled the courtroom with quiet power. "Your Honor, my sister and I were never dangerous. We were just black and brilliant." She lifted her chin. "We made music that moved people. We earned scholarships. We dreamed of changing lives through art. But none of that mattered to the people who saw our skin and decided we didn't deserve justice." She glanced up at Maya's image. "My sister is fighting for her life because people with power decided we weren't worth saving. But we are still here, still creating, still refusing to let them write our story." Judge Dorsey closed the case folder and removed her glasses. Her gaze swept across the courtroom, landing finally on the video screen showing Maya's tired but hopeful face. "I have reviewed all evidence presented," she began, her voice carrying the weight of decades on the bench. "I have examined the original trial transcripts, witness statements, and new testimony. I have listened to audio recordings that should shame every officer of this court." She paused, letting her words settle. "The misconduct in this case represents a fundamental betrayal of justice. The racial bias is not only evident but deliberately orchestrated. The medical negligence borders on criminal." Judge Dorsey sat straighter, her voice gaining strength. "Therefore, I have no choice but to vacate all charges against Celeste and Maya Green. Furthermore, this court formally apologizes on behalf of the United States of America for the grave injustice they have suffered." The gallery erupted in gasps and exclamations. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Celeste's composure finally broke as tears streamed down her face. Miss Lila wrapped her arms around the young woman, her own eyes glistening. On the video screen, Maya smiled through her tears, pressing her hand against her heart. Dr. Desai squeezed her shoulder gently, dabbing at her own eyes with her sleeve. The courthouse doors swung open and a wave of sound crashed over them. Hundreds of people packed the wide stone steps, creating a sea of movement and color that stretched to the street. Camera flashes burst like lightning and reporters thrust microphones forward, their voices overlapping in an eager chorus. Jameson stepped out first, his tall frame casting a shadow in the bright afternoon sun. His suit jacket was crisp, but his tie had been loosened, a small sign of the emotional day. Celeste emerged beside him, blinking at the intensity of the crowd. Her navy dress caught the breeze, and she lifted her chin with quiet dignity. Miss Lila followed, her hand protectively hovering near Celeste's elbow. "Miss Green, over here!" "Mr. Attorney General." What happens next? The questions flew like arrows from all directions. Signs bobbed above the crowd. Justice for the Green twins painted in bold letters. System reform now. Free at last. Some people held up phones, live streaming the moment. Others wiped tears from their eyes, caught up in the historic significance. Jameson's security detail formed a loose barrier, creating a path through the crowd. As they descended the courthouse steps, supporters reached out, not to grab, but to offer encouragement. An elderly black woman pressed her palms together in silent prayer. A young law student held up his fist in solidarity. "This way," Jameson said softly to Celeste, positioning himself between her and the most aggressive photographers. His protective instinct was natural now, unforced. A reporter from CNN pushed forward, microphone extended. "Mr. Green, what does this mean for judicial reform in America?" Jameson paused, considering his words carefully. "It means we start holding our justice system accountable. No more buried evidence, no more ignored medical needs. No more children lost in the system." "And the racial implications?" another voice called out. Celeste spoke then, her voice clear and steady. "It means maybe next time, a black girl's brilliance won't be seen as a threat." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Miss Lila squeezed Celeste's shoulder, pride shining in her eyes. They were halfway down the steps when a voice cut through the chaos. "Are you their father?" The question hung in the air. Jameson stopped walking. The cameras went silent, waiting. He turned, looking directly into the nearest lens, but his words weren't for the media. "I am now." His voice carried weight and promise. He looked at Celeste. "You didn't give up." Celeste's eyes softened, the walls built over years of abandonment showing their first real cracks. "Neither did you." The moment resonated through the crowd. Someone started crying. A reporter dabbed at her eyes with her sleeve, professionalism momentarily forgotten. More questions flew. What about Maya's recovery? Will there be civil suits? Are you returning to your position as Attorney General? But Jameson kept moving, guiding his daughter through the crowd. Miss Lila followed, her gray head held high, occasionally nodding to familiar faces in the crowd. Local supporters who'd stood vigil outside the courthouse for weeks reached out to touch her hand in gratitude. The case was already being called a landmark. News tickers scrolled across phones in the crowd. Green case forces federal review of juvenile justice. DOJ announces systemic changes. Attorney General's daughters freed. A story of justice delayed but not denied. Their black SUV waited at the curb, door held open by security. Celeste climbed in first, then Miss Lila. Jameson turned one last time to face the courthouse steps. The marble pillars stood eternal and unchanged, but everything else, everything that mattered, had shifted. He ducked into the vehicle and the door closed with a solid thunk, muffling the roar of the crowd. Through the tinted windows, the courthouse began to recede. "Never again," Jameson said quietly, watching the building disappear behind them. Celeste reached for his hand. The moment was heavy with unspoken emotion, not just victory, but the weight of new beginnings. The hard work of healing could finally start. The SUV turned a corner, leaving the courthouse and its crowds behind, carrying them toward Maya and whatever came next. The grand foyer of Carnegie Hall sparkled like a jewel box come to life. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across marble floors, while the murmur of excited voices echoed off gilded walls. Ladies in designer evening gowns swept past ornate mirrors, their heels clicking against the polished floor. Distinguished gentlemen in tuxedos gathered in small clusters, programs clutched in their hands. The historic venue had hosted countless legendary performances, but tonight felt different. The air crackled with anticipation and meaning beyond just music. Posters lined the entrance, elegant black and white designs featuring two young women at a piano, the Green Twins, in concert, a journey of survival and song. Backstage in a warmly lit dressing room, Celeste stood before a full-length mirror, her fingers working at her black bow tie with practiced precision. Her tailored suit fit perfectly, classic and sharp. Her natural hair was styled in a crown of intricate braids, small crystal pins catching the light. Her hands were steady, but her eyes held an intensity that revealed the weight of the moment. Across the room, Maya sat at her vanity, drawing slow, measured breaths. Her flowing black gown cascaded around her like liquid shadow, its subtle beading throwing off tiny sparks when she moved. Though still somewhat pale from her ongoing recovery, her face glowed with an inner light. A delicate gold chain, a gift from Miss Lila, graced her neck. 2 minutes, called a stagehand through the door, his voice carrying both excitement and respect. The twins' eyes met in the mirror. Without a word, they moved toward each other, hands finding each other's grip with the instinctive certainty of souls who had shared everything: joy, pain, music, and now freedom. Their fingers interlaced, squeezing gently. "Ready?" Celeste whispered, her usual fire tempered by tenderness. Maya nodded, her quiet strength evident in her smile. Always. Together. They made their way through the backstage labyrinth, past bustling crew members and well-wishers. The sounds of the packed house filtered through the heavy curtain, nearly 3,000 people waiting in anticipation. This wasn't just any concert. This was history being written, justice being celebrated, survival being honored. In the front row, Jameson Green sat perfectly straight in his tuxedo, hands clasped tightly in his lap. The past 3 months had changed him profoundly. The power suits and political persona had given way to something more real, a father's heart finally allowed to beat freely. Beside him, Miss Lila Whitmore adjusted her pearl-adorned scarf with trembling fingers, her eyes already glistening with unshed tears. The house lights dimmed. A hush fell over the audience. The stage door opened. Celeste and Maya emerged side by side, their steps measured and graceful. The applause was immediate and thunderous, rolling through the hall like summer thunder. People rose to their feet spontaneously, their ovation carrying all the emotion of a movement that had captured the nation's conscience. The twins moved to the gleaming grand piano centered on the stage. One bench, two souls. They settled together with the comfortable synchronicity of lifelong performers. Celeste adjusted the music sheets, though they hardly needed them anymore. Maya's fingers ghosted over the keys, finding their home position. A moment of perfect silence descended. Celeste gave a slight nod. Maya's answering smile was soft but certain. The first notes floated out over the hushed audience, gentle, questioning, like early morning light touching the horizon. Maya's left hand introduced a delicate melody that spoke of innocence, while Celeste's accompaniment hinted at shadows to come. The piece began to build, the sisters' hands dancing across the keys in perfect complement. The music told their story without words. A dark turn in the melody captured the moment of their arrest. Discordant harmonies painted their separation, their isolation. Maya's part grew fainter, matching her illness, while Celeste's grew fierce and protective. But underneath it all ran a thread of hope, unbreakable as their bond. Then came the transformation. The music swelled, climbing out of darkness into light. Their four hands moved as one, weaving together themes of justice, redemption, and love. The piece that Maya had scratched onto prison paper and Celeste had carried in her heart now soared through Carnegie Hall, touching every soul present. In the front row, Miss Lila pressed a lace handkerchief to her lips, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. Beside her, Jameson sat utterly still, his jaw working with emotion as he watched his daughters shine. Not as a politician observing a success story, but as a father witnessing his children soar. The audience remained spellbound. Supreme Court justices sat shoulder to shoulder with social activists. Musicians leaned forward in their seats, recognizing the technical brilliance beneath the emotional power. Journalists scribbled notes knowing they were witnessing something beyond words. As the piece approached its finale, the melody that had begun so tentatively returned, transformed. Strong, clear, triumphant. The twins' hands flew across the keys, building to a crescendo that filled every corner of the historic hall. The final notes rang out like a declaration of survival, of victory, of love undefeated. For a heartbeat, perfect silence held the room in thrall. Then the audience erupted. The standing ovation was immediate and universal, the applause mixed with cheers and sobs. Miss Lila stood with both hands clutched over her heart, tears streaming down her face as she gazed at her girls with pure love and pride. Jameson rose beside her, his eyes glassy, every trace of the powerful attorney general stripped away to reveal simply a father, overwhelmed with pride and joy. On stage, Celeste and Maya stood together, hands still clasped and bowed as one. Their faces shone with the light of hard-won freedom, of healing made manifest, of home finally found. They were no longer the green twins who had been wrongly imprisoned. They were artists, survivors, sisters, daughters, whole and free at last. If you enjoyed the story of Celeste, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it. Whole and free at last. If you enjoyed the story of Celeste, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.